A cup of flour, pinch of salt, enough water to bind, and a blob of yeast into a cast iron cauldron of hot lard. And you will have a food that saved lives in the 1800s. And we still love to eat this food today. Fry bread, made either savory or sweet, unified North America. For a couple of decades in the late 1800s, this food was everything. It was life or death. Whether you were a starving soldier out west in a fort, or a Native American family struggling to find food, or a missionary headed to the last frontier, this is a food that's so ingrained in our culture, you'll still see its fingerprints today. You go to county fairs and you'll see it. You go on to reservations and you'll see it. This is a food that's a huge part of Western culture. But it's a food that absolutely defines the late 1800s in America, in some really good ways and some really bad ways. Poor farm kids in Montana grew up eating fry bread. Not with powdered sugar like at the fair, but with whatever meat, grains, and vegetables they could grow or get. This was a savory dish, but sometimes a sweet dish. Why was this so common? Well, because you didn't need an oven or all day to make it. You could cook it right over an open fire after a long day of work. We're making dinner and dessert from one recipe, savory and sweet. And we're going seriously historical with our cooking ingredients. No vegetable oil, no avocado oil, pure lard. And we're gonna eat this food today with service berries or sarvis berries, June berries. These have all sorts of names in Montana, but it's one of the most edible right off the bush plants. It's sweet, it ripens this time of year. We're end of June, July. This is one of those berries everybody harvested and lived off of. It was a survival food, it was a delicacy, and we're gonna eat it today on top of our fry bread. So let's kick it off with a recipe. Now this is all 1800s style, so no scales, no fiddling with precise ratios of water to flour. It's all about the feel here. And truth be told, this is tough to mess up. So let's wing it and start combining ingredients. I've got 3 cups of sifted flour, about a cup of water, a teaspoon of salt, and about half a cup or so of fed sourdough starter. That's literally it. Some recipes call for powdered milk or adding melted butter or lard, and that certainly won't hurt. But honestly, you don't need it. This will turn out perfectly without any luxuries. You wouldn't even notice extras. I cobbled this recipe together from lots of sources, various tribes, and from talking to Michael, our resident channel historian, a man who grew up eating this fry bread as a boy in rural Montana. Michael is a wealth of historical information. He's lived all over the world, and he told me a lot about this specific food. It was a staple in his house growing up, and on reservations here, it has also stood the test of time. If you go to county fairs in Montana, you're gonna see Indian tacos on the menu. This food didn't die out in the 1800s. It has a life of its own that continues today. Okay, there's one other ingredient we really have to talk about, because as simple as these are, flour, water, a little bit of salt, there is a distinction depending on where you live. Let's say you live way down south and are part of the Navajo tribe. You probably didn't add any yeast. At least that's what I can dig up from some of the historical records. It literally was flour, water, salt, fried in lard. But a lot of other places, they're gonna use some sort of yeast. So I've seen some other cooks up here that are Blackfeet, or there was a really good video done by a Lakota woman who showed her traditional way of making this in their family, and she added yeast. Now, what kind of yeast would they have had? You know, back in the 1800s when everyone was being moved onto these reservations and they had almost no food. Do you think they were getting packets of yeast, store-bought fancy yeast? Probably not. 100 to 1 odds they were using sourdough, because that's something that was free. You could keep it, you could store it in an old boot. There's a lot of records of sourdough making its way out west into every single home, cabin, and miner's camp. So that would have been the yeast they used when cooking this food. And the yeast does a really important job. Yeast takes bread from being flat and dense to being light and airy, much more palatable. That crispy exterior crust and pillowy soft interior, that's what we're looking for. So this dough was kneaded for a number of minutes and left to rise overnight. Remember, this is a forgiving recipe, so all we're really looking to do here is to develop flavor and create air bubbles. At the cabin, we punched down the dough, cut it to size, and then it was into the cast iron pot. So this kind of simple food fed a lot of Montana settlers and soldiers in forts on the frontier. But one group of people adopted this food in a way that spans the entire continent, and it still sparks some controversy today. Maybe you were Blackfeet or Shoshone, Cheyenne, Sioux, maybe you lived way down south and were Navajo, or all the way to the east of North America, one of the hundreds of tribes that way. This is a food that became a part of your culture. It wasn't a part of culture really before this moment, and then bam, it became a unifying food around this entire continent. Now, why did that happen? Well, because the primary meat source was wiped off the plains, and rations were given to the tribes instead of their former ability to hunt. Flour, salt, and lard. The bare basics. Some people say we shouldn't even eat it anymore because it's a symbol of oppression. I've read other Native peoples argue that out of a horrific time came unification of all the tribes through this specific food, and that's a beautiful thing. Well, I'll let you guys decide, but today this food is a part of history, and we are going to cook it and eat it and taste what history was like. This one food defined a radical moment in history, but you're not going to find it in any fancy cookbooks. The book entitled Black Robes Enter Coyote's World tells of real life at an early fort out west in the 1860s and the tribes it encountered. It tells of what food was like for all people there. The new moon of April, the bitterroot moon, was soon followed by swarming grasshoppers. Good news finally came in August. The harvest of barley and peas was the best the people had ever seen at Fort Owen. Things were looking up. Owen barely had time to keep up with correspondence. Then things took a terrible turn when Nancy Owen suffered what must have been a stroke that left her partially paralyzed and unable to speak. The cold weather then surprised them at the end of the month and dashed all hope for preserving food for winter. Heavy frost killed the tomatoes, although they had been covered, and it even destroyed the more weather-resistant crops like cabbage, and even the wheat crop was damaged. Owen concluded that the Bitterroot Valley was no place for farming. The first wave of returning hunters had appeared in the Bitterroot that March, 1868. Owen noted that they had some meat, but their horses were in very poor condition. And although they had found bison closer than usual, they had suffered through several skirmishes with the Blackfeet. Everyone at the fort had hoped for the hunters' success, given their shortage of meat. Owen updated Chief Ambrose on the meat shortage at Fort Owen and was assured that word would be carried to the village for people to bring some meat and tongues for trade. Owen gave him a bag of flour, quote, in the name of his great father, and Ambrose returned 2 days later with 25 pounds of pemmican. Owen gratefully gave him some sugar in return. Nancy Owen had seemed better, but her condition worsened in mid-September. Soon she lost consciousness, and a few hours later, surrounded by her Shoshone friends, she quietly and peaceably relinquished all that was mortal. Poor woman, she is no more. After 2 decades, John Owen lost his beloved wife. These excerpts from Sally Thompson's book are such a reminder that these are real people. The men and women at the forts, the native chiefs and the families of the tribe, all these people were on the knife's edge of nature's harshness, and they're at the limits of human empathy. I mean, even in all that suffering, they were helping one another in the midst of starvation, while at the same time being at war, a war for land. No one was comfortable or safe from hardship. There was almost no meat to be had. All the bison were gone, all the wild game was gone, which left the only food at hand, stores of flour and lard that were intermittently shipped in from the government. Okay, so this is interesting. I went to reach into my flour bin, my little barrel of flour that I keep here, and it has bugs. I don't think they're weevils. I think there's some sort of flea, little bit of life that comes from the fields out here. But that is absolutely something that was dealt with in history. Number one, real flour ground right from wheat berries. It's not heavily processed, it's not bromated, it doesn't have anything added to it, unlike most grocery store flours. That real flour, other things are gonna wanna eat it too, including bugs. So it's not the sort of thing where you fill a barrel and you keep it for 8 months and just keep working out of it. Flour has to be refreshed. And realistically, I mean, it could be as little as 2 weeks before things start to get into your flour. So one of the things people did was they milled their own, right? And you milled it in small batches. Or you went to town on a, semi-frequent basis, maybe once a month in the summer, maybe a little longer in the winter, and you would get bags of flour and you'd use that flour up, because otherwise it goes bad on you. It's not like our modern grocery store foods that will keep on a shelf for years and years and years. Once you grind wheat berries, you gotta eat them. Luckily, I brought fresh flour with me today because I had a feeling that one of these days this was gonna happen to us. So it's interesting to see it. Luckily, I was down to the very bottom of the barrel. I need to give it a good scrub and clean out anyway, but I thought it was worth talking about because as simple as something like flour, water, and fat is, all your ingredients have to be in decent shape. Your fat can't be rancid, your flour can't have bugs in it, and you gotta be able to have those on hand. Not always easy in the middle of nowhere. Not all fry bread is made with yeast, and not all fried bread is made with sourdough. But one thing's for sure, all fry bread back in history was deep fried in animal fat. That means either lard or tallow. Now, in today's world, we're probably gonna go to the store and get a bottle of vegetable oil, something like that. That is not traditionally how they would have done it. So today we're gonna go traditional. We are using my prized, beloved lard, given to me by my friends Nikki and Don Hartrick. I'm always really stingy with this stuff, but when it comes to fry bread, this is one of the top 3 ingredients. We're gonna make the real version. So we used our fresh flour earlier when mixing all the ingredients, and then everything was kneaded and rose for a number of hours. This recipe is forgiving, so a couple hours or overnight doesn't really matter. We're developing air bubbles and flavor with the wait time. At the cabin, I knocked down the dough, stretched it into shape. You can see all the air pockets in it though. That is really good for our next step of frying. With a big plate stacked with fry bread, now it's time to fill each one. Traditionally, you ate this with your meat chili, your peas porridge, onions from the garden, anything. You ate what you had. Now we have a skillet going on the outdoor fire that's heating up with a little bit of lard in it, and we're adding scraps of tenderized meat left over with some onion gravy. This is perfect. Spot on historically. Into the hot skillet goes the meat, and then into the fry bread taco it goes. We've covered the few simple ingredients that this food takes, and we're gearing up to taste it, both the savory version and the sweet one. But like so many simple things, the devil is in the details. And when we first got out here today, the heat of the sun put George straight to sleep. But I had no choice in this hot weather but to get a fire going one way or another. So while he slept in the shade, I toiled in the sun. So first things first, I got kindling chopped. I use a bit of old scrap newspaper. And then, traditionally this probably would have been lit with flint and steel, or sometimes people carried fire with them. I mean, that was a very traditional way of making sure you were never without the ability to have a fire. So today, we're going a little bit new school. I've got some strike anywhere matches that I glued a piece of sandpaper to the flip side of a box that a friend chip carved for me, and I use that as my striker for matches. So we're starting a little bit modern, but the result is the same. We need a roaring campfire, but we're not gonna cook over the roaring campfire. We're gonna burn all that wood down until we get white hot coals. Then I'm gonna shovel those over to the side, and that is what I'm gonna use to heat up my big iron cauldron. It's a round bottomed cauldron with feet, and that is the perfect thing for heating up hot oil, hot fat. Any sort of Dutch oven will do, or even a deep skillet. You just want to make sure your dough can get completely submerged on both ends of it, and that your oil doesn't spill over, because hot oil and an open flame can be a bit dangerous. We were gonna come out here yesterday and cook, but that wind picked up. And cooking over the campfire on a windy day, not only is it pretty unpleasant, but it's not very safe. A lot of you who live near fire danger and things like that, up in Canada things are burning, out west things are burning. We've been pretty lucky with the rainfall. Things aren't super dry yet, but technically we're in a drought. So any sort of wood burning is something that I always think about before I get started. Got him. Darn flies. Okay, so I made the call. We're going with cooking over the campfire. This is one of those meals that has transcended all the different cultures and just become a part of the larger Montana culture. But that said, it's kind of still an unknown. It's not in the cookbooks. It's not something that you're gonna see in old Western movies. It's kind of a secret cultural staple. So I'm excited to make it today. The fry bread is made, the meat is into the Indian taco, topped with lettuce from the garden. That is a savory version checked off today's list. Next comes another tradition of eating fry bread sweet. And this might be the one we're most familiar with. The batter or the dough itself is no different. It's what you put on top. And local honey from bees kept in the fields? Well, that is a very traditional choice. Along with the sprinkling of service berries, and we have a feast laid out for ourselves. In almost no time at all. All right, it's been another hot one, but man, was it nice to do this outside. George fell asleep in the car on the way here, and he's still napping. He's gonna wake up any minute. But I have a whole meal. I've started a campfire. We've cooked not only a main meal, but a dessert, and we're ready to go eat it. But I'm not gonna eat it here, because that wouldn't be right. Robbie and his dad have been working since before the crack of dawn, raking and baling hay. So I wanna take them some food. They're sure to like at least one of these things, savory or sweet. So I'm gonna load George up, and they're either way out in one of the fields on the other side of the ranch baling hay, or they're in the machine shop repairing it, because something is always breaking on an old ranch. So let's load this food up and go find them. We can enjoy this food for fun, but during the 1860s and 70s, this food was all that people had, and small amounts of it were relied upon to keep you alive. So with flour, lard, and a bit of salt, these people had to feed themselves and one another. Another quote from a local author sums up in nature what happened with mankind during this short couple decades of the late 1800s. I have no answers on the cruelties of nature on the one hand and all her joys on the other. Why she has devised so many ways to continue life and just as many ways to destroy it. I often wonder as I watch nature work if death is nothing more than a means of fulfilling life with anticipation, and if life is merely a brief game of hide and seek. But we're alive today, and we have a delicious meal ahead. The fires are out, the dishes are clean. Let's go feed some boys. Thanks for joining us in the cabin today to cook and talk some history. Hope to see you in the same spot next Saturday. What do you think?
These belts all have different paths, and they kind of go all the way around and then back around, so there's...
I mean about the food.
Food is awesome. I have something else on my mind.
Really good.